Hello, my name is John. I am a political strategist here in Ontario. I will be doing daily YouTube updates through the election, talking about the different candidates and how things are progressing on any given day. I've called this channel The People's Strategist because I believe that there's a lot of people out there doing this kind of stuff for the parties and for corporations, but the people themselves don't usually have too much strategizing. Or I see a lot of people doing videos where they watch the news, and there's a plethora of that. So I figured I would let everybody in on a little bit of my insight. So I'm a conservative, so I do see the world through the conservative lens, but I'm not exactly a firebrand, so I think the channel would be fine for people on the left and right, especially if you're just looking to get a balanced, honest right-wing perspective. So I'll start here. I think one of the biggest things, the first thing I want to talk about, is the difference between Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre and what Canadians should be looking for in the election. So I think we have an interesting election here where we have an established politician who's been around for 20 years in Poilievre, and then we have more of a bureaucrat, but somebody that's been involved in the government, in different levels, with Mark Carney, who's sort of positioning himself as an outsider. And it's worked a little bit, but it comes with some downside as well, because when you position yourself as an outsider, you have a lot of unknown, and that gives the opposition and the media a lot to attack. And Mark Carney, with his conflicts of interest possible, has given the media and given his opposition a lot to discuss. Pierre, on the other hand, his whole entire life has been in the public, his adult life. And, that comes with a whole other thing where the public's witnessed him, and I've watched him for 20 years, but most people in the last few years have watched him sort of emerge. And you get what you see. The book has been written from both sides, favorable on the right and unfavorable on the left on Poilievre. So the narrative is sort of already formed, and it's what everybody kind of expects and understands. So it's an interesting election like that, where you have the two kind of different candidates, but not so different in other ways. I think that Canadians are afraid of Donald Trump's tariffs, and I think that that's pushing them to become a little bit irrational, because the actual problems we face as a country are not due to Donald Trump's tariffs. They are due to our own mismanagement of the economy over the past decade. Not just the Liberals, also a lot of corporations that have been lacking investment in their companies. There's all sorts of things to get into, but our economy is in rough shape, primarily because of our government, and a little bit because of us as well. A little bit because Canadians haven't expected much. We haven't been paying attention. Our GDP has not been growing, and it seems like most people are completely indifferent to it. So now that Donald Trump's involved, everybody's back up, ready to fight for Canada. But I wish that we had been doing this over the last 10 years, because we'd be in a much better position. And if we were in a better position, we wouldn't have to be so afraid of Trump's tariffs. And that's sort of where I get to Poilievre. I think Poilievre is much more capable at pulling Canada in the right direction, increasing productivity, increasing getting our assets to market. I think that these things are what will actually turn Canada around, not a fairy tale about how you need to elect somebody to save you from tariffs. There's different types of elections that candidates run on. Sometimes it's hope, and sometimes it's fear. And Mark Carney's chosen the fear approach, and it worked for many of the governments during the pandemic, where people saw it as a one-issue election, and they weren't really interested in the future of the economy or anything else. They were just interested in what they perceive to be saving the country and sometimes the provinces, depending on the election, from COVID. So I think that they're running the similar playbook. It's basically, this is an emergency election. We're in an emergency time. This is a special time. You need us because we're the ones that can get you through this. But that's not what this election's about. This election is about the last 10 years. And in the last 10 years, the Liberals have been the ones that have been in charge of the economy, including the advisor Mark Carney. So it's the same old bunch, right? The same old gang of usual suspects. And they're back here to say, hey, we saved you during COVID, and now you need us to save you again. And a lot of the rhetoric makes me laugh because, like, I can say provincially with Doug Ford, he said he's never fought and so hard for Ontarians as right now, but he also said that during COVID. And if you remember how COVID was presented, it was presented as much more dangerous than tariffs. So the fact that they're fighting harder than ever doesn't make much sense. And Chrystia Freeland said the same thing. It just doesn't add up with the media reports for the severity of everything. And had they have worried about the economy back in 2020 instead of, doing drastic measures, again, we'd probably be in much better shape. So our economy has been going backwards, and it's due to Liberal mismanagement. The Liberals want everybody to think that the election is about Donald Trump, right? But that was what Harris's election was about. She lost. So this election is between Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney, and it's an election for the Prime Minister. Who can lead the country better? We're not looking for a one trick Prime Minister who believes that because he has banking expertise, he can somehow handle trade negotiations. I think that's ridiculous, to be honest. I think that it's important to, have experts, and I believe that Mark Carney is an adequate banker. But the idea that a banker is what's going to lead Canada through this is ridiculous. If you ask anybody about his track record in England as a banker, the first thing that comes up is quantitative easing, which means printing money. So what Mark Carney does is he prints money, and then he instructs the corporations and other people do through reports where to invest and how to collect all that money. And then once the corporations collect all the money, he goes, look, we've done a really good job. The corporations have more money. Meanwhile, inflation out through the roof, housing prices continue to skyrocket, and quality of life continues to decrease. So that's what we're getting from the Liberals. And that's just undeniable. A lot of the social projects that we've been paying for, carbon pricing, for example, have just not transpired. And they've harmed our country. They've caused investment to leave, and they've put an undue burden on the backs of taxpayers. That's the problem. Now, Mark Carney's going to try to hide that again. He's going to say, well, I'm taking the consumer tax proposal off, and it's going to be somehow in the background, and you won't have to pay for it because the companies, they love the climate, and they're just going to eat the buck. They're just going to pay the extra tax. Don't worry about it. That's obviously his level of thought. It's ridiculous. And then he lies to Canadians and says, well, you have to have it or else you can't deal with other countries. That's not true. There's nothing true about that. When he pressed on questions about his own conflicts of interest, it's the same thing. He sort of just spins a web. And bankers are good at that. They like to tell their clients, hey, this is great. Sign here, sign here. They don't like too much pushback. They like to be, I'm the expert, you're the customer, so you listen to me. That's not good for a prime minister. Poilievre, surprisingly, is, he's had his moments with the media. He's much more capable of dealing with them than Carney. And that's obvious. Poilievre's had a rough road with them for a decade at least. And he still shows up and answers the questions, and he can get snippy. Mark Carney is a favored candidate from mainstream media for the most part. He can't seem to handle any tough questions because he's not used to answering them. And he's a fantastic glad-hander. He's able to skate around, barely, but he's able to kind of look the part of a politician and try to do the low-hanging fruit type of stuff. But once he gets into the higher level of politics, he's going to be exposed. He will be exposed over this campaign season as well. He will not do well in the debate against Poilievre. Poilievre is a seasoned person with debating, and Mark Carney can't get through a sentence without He's horrible to listen to, and that doesn't translate well during a debate. So I honestly think, as a conservative perspective, that's sort of what I'm looking for coming up with the election here. And I'm interested to see how it goes. I think that the conservatives will come out on top, just like Trump ended up doing in America. There was the big Harris bump when she took over from Biden. And, everybody, the news jumped on board. Ben Affleck was excited. What could go wrong, right? And ultimately, they ended up losing. So, and I think that, we seem to repeat the American system here sometimes a little bit later. Trudeau was our Obama, our big change candidate for the progressive left many years later. And now we're heading back to a position where the right's becoming more favorable, which ended up happening in America as well, based on the economy. So the difference is Biden's economy was much stronger than Trudeau's, and so was Obama's. So Trudeau and the Liberals have been asleep at the wheel for 10 years, and now that they're heading into the iceberg, and the ship is about to crash, they go, okay, let's put on our life jackets and our Team Canada gear, and we're here to fix the problem. It's like way too late. And that's politics, right? Politicians are always here to tell you that they're going to save the problems, right? But ultimately, when you've been doing it for 10 years and you've caused the problems, it lacks credibility. It'd be like going to a doctor for a surgery that he botches and then trusting the same doctor to fix the surgery. Like most people would say, I'd like a new doctor, please. I don't trust this one. And that's what Canadians have to ask themselves is this new shiny paint job on a broken down car with Mark Carney, the new leader, is it anything different than what we've been getting? Because it's not. It's not. It's going to be more complicated hiding of the carbon tax and the same globalist policies that benefit global corporations and drive wages down. And it's just going to be harder for the public to assess because Mark Carney, the banker, will obfuscate and make it confusing, which we've already seen. So it's going to be an interesting election. I think the people really need to ask themselves, which direction is the country going in? And can we afford to have another crisis election where we vote based on one issue and not the underlying problems that are actually harming the economy?